The ability to create reusable components to make sure that they're efficient, they're clear, there's a clear pattern involved is honestly one of the most important skills of being a React developer. When I'm interviewing candidates for a project or a position or whatever, I always look at their ability to create reusable components and to abstract away different things and different components and architect and put everything together to make up the React application, right? So it's very, very important. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to master the art of creating reusable components. I'm going to teach you everything that I think about when I'm creating those components, the questions that I ask myself, the questions that honestly you should be asking yourself, and I will make sure that you never write a bad component again in your React applications. Now, if you want my #1 resource for actually becoming a great React developer, I would highly encourage you to check out my free newsletter. It's called Import React, and you get tips and tricks and really cool stuff about React that I actually base a lot of my videos on completely for free, delivered to your inbox every single week. If you're interested, once again, it's called Import React. It'll be the first link in the description. All right, cool. So let's begin. So here I have an application. It is empty. And now let's talk about how to create reusable components. And for this, I'm just going to use a simple example, something that I've actually had to do in a project before, where I've had to actually create a table component that actually took in some data and managed everything within it and showed it as a table. We had filtering, we had like all of these custom functionalities, and I had to use that and actually replace over 50% of the code in the project using this one reusable component. So when I talk about reusable components, I generally like to think that I know what I'm talking about. So in this video, we're going to do something similar. We're going to create our own version of a table component. But again, it's not really going to be that serious. We're almost going to be writing pseudocode just because the concepts here matter more than the actual implementation. So let's come here. And the first step to creating any component is, first of all, you put it in a new file. And if you don't have this in your project, you come here and you create a folder and you call this components. And you put all of your components inside of it, no question, right? If you're using feature-based folders, that's fine. You just have to put your components in a component folder to keep yourself organized. And in here, we're going to create a new component and let's call it data table.tsx like this and start building our data table. So I'm just going to do something super simple here. We're just going to do export default function data table. We're just going to return here. I am going to be using a little bit of AI in this video just because it's going to make our life a little bit easier. And generally nowadays, I don't really code without AI. So it's about time that I introduce it in my channel and that you also learn a little bit as to how to code with AI. So we have this data table component here. Now let's come here to our app. Let's get rid of costs and solutions, unfortunately, and let's import here data table. And we're going to import it from components/data table. And now we can actually start building this and start, more importantly, figuring out how do we build this. So what do we want this data table component to be? How do we want it to work? And how do we want to use it in our application? So the first thing that we really have to ask ourselves is, this is going to be a data table component, which means that it's going to be responsible for taking in some data or for even creating its own data, right? And then displaying it in the table. And the first question that we want to ask ourselves is, where is this data going to be coming from? Is it going to come from a parent, which means we're going to have to pass it through props, or is it actually going to be maintained and managed through this component inside of its code by means of maybe potentially fetching some data? Maybe we only need to pass a URL and it is going to handle fetching the data automatically, right? Because both options are valid. You can either pass the data to this component and just let it render it, or you can actually pass a URL and have this component actually fetch the data. So if you were to come in here at the top and do something like type like this and data table props, and here as a type, we might do something like data like this. And this for now, we're going to put unknown or actually any, just to keep things simple, right? We're going to put any here. We can actually have this be data and then take this any, right? Or we could do something like URL and then have this be a string, and then we can use that URL to actually define how we fetch our data. Now, this is actually a very important decision. Let's put back here the data like this. Let's put back, this is actually a very important decision because this is going to ultimately determine how you're going to use this component and how other components are going to behave. If we, for example, had to pass in here the data, so we comment this out and we pass here the data, right? Which again, it could be anything. Then that means that in our app component over here, we would actually have to pass our data here, right? We have to pass some array of data. And let me just actually put the types over here. props, data table props, right? So now we have type inference. We're going to have to pass some data here, which means that now we're going to have to here fetch the data from the API, right? Because our data has to come from somewhere. So that is going to be a decision that is going to impact more than just this data table component. So again, there's not any right or wrong decision. This is perfectly fine. Having the URL is perfectly fine as well. I've done both, right? And they work just fine. It's completely fine. But it is going to have impacts on the rest of your application that you need to be aware about, and you need to know when making that decision, right? So that's one decision. Then going back here to our data table, let's say, for example, we just keep this data here and we just have this data be passed over here, right? Let's keep it simple. Now we're going to have to render some table here. So let's just actually, maybe let me just ask AI to just run a simple table here. So let's just do here and let's replace this, create a very simple table with dummy data using props, right? Just something very, very simple, right? Nothing too complex. And let's see what the AI comes up with, because I don't want to write this. It's time consuming. So let the AI do it. And there we go. It gave us something. I don't know exactly if it's going to be correct, but let's see. Let me just close this. There we go. And now we have some actual data. So it actually populated the data with some actual data here, which is fine. It's kind of what I told it to do. Then here we have this table, right? This is all markup generated by the AI. That's totally fine. And then we're rendering over here all of these different columns, right? So this is great. That is kind of an example of how this data would actually look like in this implementation of the data table component. But now, as you can see here, the first thing that I notice is that the table headers here are hard-coded. We're actually depending on an ID, on a name, on an email, and on a role. If you want to make a reusable component, that's not going to be okay. So that's another rule of reusable components. Don't make things hard-coded. Make things configurable. And since we're passing the data from the parent, we also might want to pass the columns from the parent to allow the parent to actually determine how we render each individual column, right? So that's our next step. So here, what I'm going to do is actually tell the AI to, instead of doing this, we're going to tell it to actually have the parent provide columns to the table in a simple and efficient way. It's okay if you make typos when the AI is doing things, it understands you regardless. So now let's give this a moment to just generate, and it should be pretty simple. You can kind of see what is going on here. We're going to actually go and take a look at this. Let it finish. There we go. It accepted. And now we can see what it actually did. So first of all, now when we're creating this component, and now we no longer only take in the data, but we also take in a column definition, right? We're just going to have a key right over here, and it's going to have a header over here, right? Now, again, you can completely customize this, right? Again, the actual detailed implementation doesn't really matter as much as the concept itself, but you pass the columns now from the parent. And now in here, we take these columns as props, and for every column we map. That way our parent, right, this app component can now say, hey, I want an ID, I want a name, I want this email, I want this role, this is the header for it, or I don't want any of these and I just want the ID property, right? It's no longer the responsibility of the data table to configure anything. It just receives props and then it just renders based on those props. That's how you make things reusable. Right? So that's already a big improvement, right? We've already made this data table highly reusable. This data table doesn't know what data it's getting, doesn't know what columns it's getting, doesn't care, honestly, just knows to render the columns and just knows to render the data. But we can actually take this one step further. Now that we've actually let the parent customize the headers of the actual columns, why don't we also let the parent customize how the data is rendered? Because who knows, maybe we don't want to just render this as a string. Maybe we want to use a component. Maybe we want to allow this to be more customizable. Again, this is all going to depend on your actual component and how you want to do things. But generally, the more reusable a component can be, the more it should be. And then is ultimately going to be just a better component. Now, before we continue with this video, I just want to take a very quick moment to really think about what it is that we're actually doing here. Because what we're doing is something that is called learning by doing, right? You're not just watching like a traditional lecture video, you're actually watching me implement this in front of you, which is learning by doing, right? Which is great because that's exactly what the sponsor of today's video, Brilliant, is also doing. Brilliant is a platform where you learn by doing. They have thousands of interactive lessons in various topics such as math, data analysis, AI, and of course, more importantly for us, programming. Brilliant has a learning platform that is designed to be uniquely effective. Their first principles approach helps you build understanding from the ground up. Each lesson that you have on there is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, which is actually a method that has been proven to be 6 times more effective than watching traditional lecture videos. Plus, all of the content on Brilliant is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from places such as MIT, Caltech, Microsoft, Google, and so much more. Brilliant literally helps you build your critical thinking skills through problem solving instead of memorizing. So while you're building real knowledge on specific topics, you're also learning how to become a better thinker. And if you want some recommendations for some great courses to take on Brilliant, you should definitely check out Thinking in Code, which follows pretty much what we're doing in this video and teaches you solid foundations for computer science that are going to directly help you as a React developer. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/cost-and-solutions or scan the QR code on the screen or simply click the first link in the description. You're also going to get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thank you once again to Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning how to master reusable components in React. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, make the parent provide a render data prop to allow rendering custom things in the row, right? So again, we're going to let Copilot do everything. It is usually pretty smart at these types of things. And you're going to see what it's doing, which again is exactly what I would have done, just saves me from actually implementing it myself. You're going to see how we can actually make this even more reusable while not complicating our life too much. So let's accept everything and let's see what the AI actually did for us. So I just had to go one more round to actually fix some types here. Again, this is not necessarily going to be the best and most optimized code. Once again, the concept is more important than the actual implementation. What we did here, what is different, is now each column takes in a key, takes in a header, and then also takes in here a render function, right? And here we're now using type generics. So we're taking this column, it is going to be of some type of type T. The key is going to be one of its keys, so key of T. And then the render function is going to actually get T, and then key of T is going to get one of these data over here, and is going to return a React node, right? And then we have the props over here. Data is going to be an array of T, and then the columns is going to be a column of also type T, right? And now in here, we're taking the columns just like we had before. We're just rendering the columns, but now for every single row in here, we're also, besides this TD, this table D right here, we're also going to call column.render and then pass the actual value of what we're actually trying to render, right? And now if we go back here to the app component, you're going to see that now we can just define our columns over here and we can pass in here some key, some header, and then some render function. These are our types, and we can just pass them, right? So for example, the ID is going to be a header ID, right? We're not going to specify anything in terms of what it should render as a cell, right? Because that's going to be just a string. But here in the email, we want to do, let's render value. And here we're actually going to render an A tag, right? An href, and we're going to pass your mail to, and then the actual value, right? That is how you build reusable components. You pass data from props and you configure things in such a way that the parent can define, hey, I want to render it this way, and this value is going to come back from the child that is rendering things. As you can see here, we're going to call this render function, we're going to call with the actual value of the row, right? That is going to be the actual cell that we're trying to render. And this is a really powerful pattern because once again, we haven't changed the fact that this data table still doesn't care what columns it receives, still doesn't care what data it receives, right? Now it just uses type generic. So that's as far as it's going to care, right? Its data is just going to be a T, and that's all that it cares. But it knows that every single column will have a key, will have a header, and then optionally a render function, which it can call with the value which it gets, right? So the data table component, this reusable component, is just here, has some behaviors, and the data that you pass to it is the data that you get back, and you can use to actually do some cool stuff with it. And that's how you build reusable components. You just add more things, you think about things, and you think who should actually be in charge of this specific thing. Who should define the data? Who should define the columns? What should the columns be? How do we get this data from here? How do we actually let the parent specify this, but also pass the value from the child? That's a great example of how you want to do it. But we can actually take this a step further, because I generally don't like everything to be in one component like this. I like to just keep things a little bit more organized. And this is now going to be a great example of how we can break this apart into multiple subcomponents, again, reusable components that we can now compose to make one big data table component that we can still use exactly in the same way across the project. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to tell the AI once again to make more updates for us. I'm going to be split the data table into multiple components, for example, rendering rows or headers, and put all in same file. We're just going to keep things simple. We're going to let everything be in the same file. Let's see what the AI comes up and let's see what it tells us to do. And as you can see, it's already starting to create for us different components, different props, and now everything is a little bit more organized. So let's accept all and let's see. First of all, any type errors, none at all. There we go. We are good to go. So what did it create, right? So first at the top here, we have all of our types, right? This is also going to be a good candidate to maybe export this in like a separate file. In here, we can put like components and then data table.types or something if you want to keep organized. In here, it's in the same file. It's totally fine. Then we have here table header component. It takes in some columns and then renders here the actual columns, the actual headers that we had before. This is the same code as we had before. It's just now in a new component, which is better. It's more organized, right? Because now we have one component that is only responsible for rendering the table headers. And if we need to add any more logic in terms of the table headers, we can do it using this component and not have to put everything in that one main data table component. Then if I scroll down here, we have the same exact thing with table row, right? We just have some types over here. That's fine. And then we're rendering all of the rows again in the same way. But now here also, we've deferred the rendering of the individual cell to a new component called table cell. And we pass it here some props, right? This is perfectly valid. And I'm very proud of this code, actually. It's like completely AI generated, but AI is so good nowadays, like it's insane. And then we have this new table cell component, right? Receives the value st, receives the render function, and then just does the same thing as we had it before, but now it's cleaner. Now, if we have a render function, we call render and then value. Otherwise, we just do string and then value. And then we have our data table component, same component as we had it before, but now we're just putting data table header here. We're passing the columns, we put a t-body, and then we're mapping over all of this, and we're rendering the table row. And look at our data table component from line 73 to line almost 93, right? So that's 19 lines of code, including the export and the type definitions for our data table, which now is highly customizable at this point, and we can add so much more to it. This is the way that you build reusable components. You think about where the data should be, where the data should live, what this component should have as props, what it should receive, what it should defer to other parts of the application, right? Now, fair enough. We created these other components, table row, table header. These are not necessarily that reusable, right? Because again, table row, where else you're going to use it outside of the data table component, right? But still, if we wanted to, we could, because now it's in a separate component. If you wanted to reuse this, we could just export it, put it in a different file because it would make more sense. And then as long as we passed it some columns of the correct type, it would also work, right? And this is fine. Again, this is a reusable component, even if it's not necessarily being reused right now. And then the more you do this, the more you create components, the better you're going to get at figuring out what props it should have, right? So again, this data table component only receives two props, the data and the columns. That's it. I've seen projects and a lot of developers have this tendency to just add prop after prop after prop, when really simplicity is the key. Have it receive just a few props. That way it's super easy to manage, and then defer it to other components and pass those props and let the other components take care of the job from there. Right? And it's going to make everything super simple. And then to actually use this component, well, now, because we have this component, we could use it in any component that we want to have some data. We just have to define these columns over here, right? That's all that we want to do. And then after we define the columns, we just give it some data, and then the table is going to take it from there. We don't need to manage anything ourselves anymore. And then if you want to extend this even further, we're not going to do it in this video because this video is quite long already. But let's say, for example, you wanted to add filters and stuff like that. You would also ask yourself the question, where should the filters be? Should it be the parent that manages the filters? Or should it be this data table? How did the filters then work with the actual data? If we're passing here the data to this component, maybe the filter should also live in the actual parent who's using this component. If we were, like I talked about in the beginning of this video, if we were just passing a URL, then maybe the filter should live and be managed inside of this table component, right? These are all decisions that will highly depend based on how you want to set it up, but the concept still remains the same. Keep it simple, think about where and what should go in which place, and then architect your components in that way to support that decision. And really, that's all that I really have to say about this, right? Without making this video too long. I will post this code on GitHub so you can play around with it. But again, you've seen firsthand how I built this using AI. That's also another argument to just use AI in your applications, especially nowadays. Expect more of AI stuff on the channel slowly. I don't want to like make a drastic change, but you've seen I've just built this entire thing in like a couple of seconds with a couple of prompts, right? So take this code. If you have access to AI, just use it and try to learn from it. Even ask the AI questions. but really try to understand, going back to the beginning of this video, really try to understand the concepts, because those are much more important than the actual implementation. If you understand the concepts, you'll then know how to master and how to write beautiful, highly reusable components that are efficient, that are a joy to work with, and that is going to make building a large-scale project super simple. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos just like this one, make sure to leave this video a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. And with that being said, my name has been Darius Kozin. This is Kozin Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.